Hey everyone. In this video, I wanted to go over the instructions for the second response on Landval and or Sir Gawain. So, so what I'm going to do is share my screen with you, and we'll take a look at this in Blackboard. Um, so you can find the response in assignments, um, and I'm going to click this link. You can read the response. So the response says explores how sexuality both defines and complicates the heroic values of Landval and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So, in other words, how do sexual desire, sexual temptation, and sexual identity provide obstacles and opportunities for Landval and Sir Gawain to prove their honor and loyalty? Okay, your response can focus on one of these romances, or you can choose an example from each. All right, so if you feel like that there's sort of a common, something about, these romances that, sort of a common theme that you see that addresses the question in both the romances, you can choose an example from each. But the response should be between 450 and 600 words. So, some of this stuff, if you didn't read my thoughts that I posted on Landval and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, you can find those in announcements. They're PDFs where I sort of explore some of these themes. So I definitely would start there because I feel like I explained there, sort of the general idea that that these romances, part of what separates them from what we see in Beowulf is that in many ways not. I mean, in Beowulf, Beowulf is literally fighting monsters, right? Like the enemy is very defined and it's very external. In a lot of ways, Landval and Sir Gawain are kind of, fighting themselves. Their conflict is more internal, and in I think interesting ways, they're sort of struggling with their own sexuality throughout these stories and throughout these poems. With Landval, it's sort of resisting the temptation of the queen. His preserving sort of his love and honor towards this Ami, who's kind of this fantasy figure. And I go in this in more detail in my thoughts. This idea that Landval, he's really bummed out at the beginning because like he's being overlooked, but then suddenly he's got all these beautiful women who want to meet his every need, and and all he has to do is keep it a secret, which he can't do. With Sir Gawain, obviously there's the overarching conflict with the Green Knight, who's sort of kind of this like monstrous presence, that we find out that he is actually just a person with the help of a little magic. And but like really sort of the struggle, the test for Sir Gawain is all about his kind of resisting the impulse, resisting the temptation of Bertilac's wife, which he's able to do by sort of transferring, like he kisses Bertilac's wife and then he has to kiss Bertilac, right? So there's this kind of this sort of strange like transference of sort of like sexual energy from like back and forth from the woman to the man, and I go into this in a lot more detail in my thoughts, how there's there's definitely sort of homosexual overtones to like the way this arrangement works, and part of the tension as you're sort of watching is like, well, how far is Gawain going to go with the woman, and if he does, is he going to go that far with the man. You know, and so that dynamic I think is really interesting. And so, you know, and you know, basically, you know, you have, what I want you to sort of do here is kind of think about these, you know, these works in terms of sort of the role that sexuality, that sexual temptation, the sexual desire, the sexual impulse sort of plays in sort of shaping how these characters, you know, pursue honor, you know, like, you know, and what, how they sort of fulfill their heroic duty in a way. You know, again, Beowulf fulfills it by fighting and killing monsters. You know, my take is that in a lot of ways, Landval and Sir Gawain fulfill their heroic duty by, you know, sort of finding ways to, you know, sort of navigate sort of the sexual politics of the situation that they're in, and kind of navigate their own sexuality and their own sexual desire and ability to deal with temptation. Because this is a short response, this is just going back to the text of the assignment, because this is a short response, focus on a specific observation about these works that is relevant to the question. Do not try to answer every possible dimension of this topic, right? There's, you know, there's a lot of directions you can go in this. So just focus on one. You know, I'd rather it be focused and have depth than broad and not a lot of depth, meaning that you try to cover all different topics, but none of them, you know, with a lot of detail and analysis. So the best way to start is to figure out your examples. You know, choose two examples that are both relevant to this topic and demonstrate a theme or pattern, right? And again, it could be one example from each or two examples from one of the works, all right? Your response will then explain that theme and pattern and why we see it in your examples and how it helps us better understand the topic. So like I mentioned before, you know, homosexuality appears in both works, right? So, you know, Landval, you know, feels like he has to defend himself against, you know, Guinevere's accusation of homosexuality. You know, as I mentioned before, there's sort of this sexual tension that seems to exist, you know, between Gawain, Bertilac's wife, and Bertilac. So, you know, so it could be, you know, that could be sort of your starting point. It's like, okay, like I can see, you know, there's something that these two texts have in common. Or again, it could be just two examples within one of the works. But something that reveals something interesting about the relationship about, you know, sexuality. In this case, you know, if you're focusing on homosexuality and heroism. Your response should be analytic, not moralistic. And what I mean here is that, you know, like I don't want, you know, do not use the works to tell us what we should or should not do with regards to sexuality, right? So the point of this is not to, you know, to like warn us, you know, about the, you know, the moral dangers of exploring our sexuality or anything like that. Like the point is to try to sort of understand how, you know, how sexuality is sort of defined and understood within the works themselves, you know, and using these works as sort of a window to maybe better understand how these concepts were defined at the time that the works were written. You know, so you're just trying to understand, you know, and again, not necessarily like what the works are, you know, any kind of moral lesson the works are trying to tell us about it, but just trying to understand how these concepts sort of coexist, the concepts of sort of like sexuality and sex and heroism, and how they sort of both exist within the poem and come into conflict within the poems. Okay. So organization, you know, the organization is very similar as before, and, you know, and I've tried to really lay it out for you so that if you kind of follow this structure, then you should do fine. So I want a short introduction that introduces the relationship between sexuality and heroism that you want to explore, briefly introduce the work or works you will be writing about. Just very short summaries, like the 1 to 3 sentence summary of the work. And then, a thesis that explains what the examples you provide will reveal about this relationship. All right. So, so when you're doing your thesis, and the thesis might be something you come back to at the end after you've done your analysis of the quotations. But, it's sort of the thesis is basically explaining to us what's going to tie these two examples together. And then, so the 2 body paragraphs, 150 to 200 words each. The body paragraphs should be a little bit longer. Give context in each one. Give context for the quotation that demonstrates the relationship between heroism and sexuality. There should be at least 3 sentences of context before your quotation that explain the situation and any relevant background information. Right. So what is happening at this point of the story? What is this quotation specifically about? That's all context. You want to present your quotation using correct formatting and citations. I recommend using the same model we've been practicing in the discussion boards, but I do have a couple of links here that might be helpful for you. Particularly this first one, it really breaks down, when do we introduce a quotation with a colon? When do we do it with just a comma? When do we integrate the quotation, right? And, giving some examples of each. All right. And then the other quotation goes into a little more detail about formatting quotations that is also helpful. You want to make sure you're citing the quotation correctly, using the in-text citation just like we've been doing in the discussion questions. After the quotation, give at least 3 sentences of analysis, and then again, your analysis, you want to think of your analysis as your defense of your choice of choosing this quotation, right? And in other words, you're basically explaining to us why you chose this quotation to talk about this topic. So, so you don't want, too often I see in the analysis where it's like, here's a quotation, now let me talk about, the rest of the story. But no, the whole point is that you're justifying your decision to include this quotation in your paragraph. So you should be explaining how the details, the words, the phrases of this quotation, why they are significant to this topic. Explaining what they reveal to us about the relationship between sexuality and heroism. And if you're having a hard time doing that with your quotation, you probably just haven't chosen a good quotation. Again, you're choosing a quotation for analysis, not a quotation to help you tell the story. And that's the mistake that I often see, is that people choose a quotation because it helps them explain like what's happening at this moment in the story, but it doesn't really give you a lot to analyze. All right. So, so you got to choose your quotation with that idea. Okay, I need to find a quotation that I can analyze, that I can, really break down, what this quotation, these specific words tell us about this relationship. So you're doing that. So 2 body paragraphs. Okay. And then your conclusion, a brief statement on the relevance of your thesis. How does your claim improve our understanding and appreciation of these works? So it's sort of taking kind of a step back. In a lot of ways, the conclusion is your defense of, this is why this essay, you should read this essay. This is why this essay is important. This is why it helps us better understand, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, or Landval, or both. Just like the last one, I don't want you to use any sources or study guides for this response. I want you to avoid, going to Spark Notes and Lit Charts, at least as a way to, beef up your analysis. If you're confused about sort of the basic plot points of what's happening at this point of the story, because sometimes the language can be confusing, I don't want to discourage you from like seeking out a resource that helps you better understand the plot or helps you avoid maybe misunderstanding something that's happening in the story. What I don't want is for you to go and sort of read the analysis of Spark Notes and then try to take that and try to shoehorn that idea into your own analysis. With analysis, it's, especially with something like this, it's kind of better just to set all that stuff aside and just sort of approach it fresh. Not let your mind get, sort of bogged down with all these other things that other people have said about it, but just sort of look at it with fresh eyes and figure out, okay, what do you see here about this relationship and how it applies to the quotation? And again, you're citing it just as you did with the discussion question assignment with text citations and a works cited entry at the end. All right. So formatting and submission, it's all basically the same as before. And again, I provide you with this nice template that you can use, and I have it as a PDF, but also as a Microsoft Word document too, so that you can actually go in and edit. So you can fill in all the relevant information. You want to change the dates 2021. Title, begin essay here, but then the works cited. If you're using the Microsoft Word version, it's already set up for double spacing, hanging indentation, and all of that. So you're just basically filling it in. Landval has an author, so you need to include the author for Landval. If you're doing Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, there's no author, so you just begin with the title of the work. Italicize Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and italicize Landval. What else? If you are writing about both stories, you do have to give 2 works cited entries. So if you're going to do Landval and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, then you need to do this twice, one underneath the other, and it's going to be alphabetized with Landval first. Okay. Because it's going to start with France, and France is alphabetized, so F comes before S, so the other one starts with an S. So you'll do Landval first for your citation. So again, this is due on Sunday by 11:59 p.m. If you're a few other things here, if you're doing for the in-text citations, and also on the works cited entry, you're actually going to begin with de France. So your in-text citation will be de France, and then the works cited entry would be de France, comma, Marie. All right. So there's guidelines on when you put DE at the beginning and when you don't. It's not worth going into. For this one, you don't, basically because France is short. That's just the rule. Sorry, you do put it at the beginning because France is short. If France were like a 4-syllable word, you would put it after, you wouldn't include it here. So make sure when you submit it as a Microsoft Word document. Make sure that it's submitted correctly, that you can actually read the document in the window after you've hit submit. You should also get an email confirmation of your submission. And if for some reason, either one of those things do not happen, in other words, you can't read your essay in the Blackboard window after you hit submit, and you don't get a text saying that you've submitted your essay, email me the essay. All right. If you have any doubt over whether or not it's submitted correctly in Blackboard, email it to me. All right. I would rather you email it to me and it's fine, it is submitted correctly, than for it to not be submitted correctly and then you don't email it to me, because at that point, you didn't submit the assignment on time. I didn't get the work, and if I don't realize that for 3 days later, well, that's 3 more days that you had to work on it that other people didn't have. So at that point, it's considered, it will be considered a late assignment, and probably would not be accepted. So so make sure you're submitting it correctly. If you have any doubts, email the essay to me as a Microsoft Word document. All right, so that's it for this video. Thank you again. Make sure you've got your work for this week done by Sunday, by 11:59. Thank you.